Hi friends, welcome to BronsCast episode number 8, and this is called Composing from the Void part 1. I don't know when I'll get around to doing part 2 and 3 and 4, but this is part 1 of a podcast really looking at what to do when you don't know where to start with a composition, or maybe you've been composing for a while and you've just got a little bit stuck. But before we get into the subject of the podcast, which I think is a really interesting subject and really relevant if like me, you've kind of run into a dead end with composition. Before we get into that, first some updates. So my album Based on a True Story is out on iTunes. You can buy it now if you haven't bought the album in the physical copy. Obviously, I would rather everyone bought a physical copy, but I know a lot of you guys like the convenience of buying stuff on iTunes. So if you do a search for Dave Brons and Based on a True Story, you'll find that. And the second bit of news is I'm out on tour, not playing my own music, but playing the amazing Celtic prog music of Mr. Dave Bainbridge. And I'm out on tour in September. All the tour in the UK, I should add. All the tour dates are on my website, davebrons.com, underneath the news section. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get on to today's podcast. So, like I was saying, the hardest thing with composing music can often be just getting the initial inspiration of where to start. And around about 95, 96, I wanted to start sort of writing instrumental music inspired by a lot of the guys I was listening to at the time, like Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Jeff Beck and people like that. And to be honest, I didn't really know where to start with it. Writing a song without lyrics was something I hadn't really tried before. And I'd only really been playing guitar for a few years. I started in 91, so I've been playing guitar maybe 5 or 6 years. And so I got together with my friend Mark Swift, who's the keyboard player in my band, and we were trying to come up with ideas. We were kind of just really getting stuck, but the good news is that it's not really an uncommon problem. So if you're the kind of person who's been stuck, there's lots of composers throughout history who've had the exact same problem. So just let me start off by reading you a quote from Mahler, the famous composer. He was kind of really frustrated that he couldn't come up with any ideas, and obviously he'd had a long history of creating music and he just sort of run into a dead end. And this is a quote from him. It says, "In art, as in life, I am at the mercy of spontaneity. If I had to compose, not a note would come. One summer I'd made up my mind to finish the 7th, both andantes of which were already on the table. I plagued myself for 2 weeks until I sank into a gloom, as you might well remember. Then I tore off to the Dolomites." It's a place. "There I was led to the same dance until at last I gave it up and returned home, convinced that the whole summer was lost. I got on the boat and to be rowed across. At the first stroke of the oars, the theme, or rather the rhythm and character of the introduction to the first movement came into my head, and then in 4 weeks the first, third and fifth movement were done." So Mahler had written like quite a lot of this particular symphony, but he's just really stuck on the main kind of content of it, which is kind of a bit odd. But then just hearing the splash of the oars in the water just like sparked that inspiration. And he's not alone. There's other composers as well. Haydn, who used to get really depressed, saying he was incapable of finding a single idea for many days. Brahms could fall sick with longing for a new fresh strain, and Smetana once wrote of the world of the imagination as veiled through, though by a mist of depression and pain. Then, way better, this one's funny. "Shall I ever find a single thought within me? Now there is nothing. I feel as if I'd never composed a note in my life, and that all the operas could have never really been mine." So it's a really common thing, guys, to not have this inspiration and to feel like you just don't know where to start. All those quotes, by the way, are from a great book called Music and Inspiration by Jonathan Harvey. Really worth picking that up secondhand on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. So, today's podcast, today's BronsCast, I want to just talk about 3 different ways in which I try and tackle this thing of coming up with something out of nothing. I mean, first I'd preface that by saying I don't really believe that things just come out of nowhere. I think that a lot of these composers probably had already been listening to music, and if you're a musician or want to be a composer, the one thing you should be listening to is a lot of music, be it good music or bad music, so that you get the good ideas, and then if from the bad music you learn what not to do. But you should proportion a time of your week to listening to music, and especially new music. Anyway, so 3 ways that we're going to talk about, and they all revolve around shapes. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is melodic shapes. Then we're going to talk about scene shapes, i.e. shapes from nature, and then form shapes. So melodic shapes, scene shapes, and form shapes. Okay, so stick with me for the next half an hour, and let's see where this ends up. So the first thing, in terms of melodic shapes, what that is when you hear a melody or find the shape of a melody, and then that creates like as a springboard, if you like, to creating your own piece. In a previous BronsCast called "Don't Imitate." Good composers don't imitate, they steal. We talked a bit about how you can take an idea and use that to make a new idea. So take old information to make new information. And I'm sorry if I say that in almost every BronsCast, but it's something that I really believe. This is kind of, I guess, an example of that, but more where you really follow the melodic contours. So one of my favourite pieces of music is Nimrod by Elgar. It's often touted as a really quintessential English piece, and you hear it all sorts of kind of national events in my country. And it was actually Elgar was really stuck for inspiration, and he wrote this composition called Nimrod, which was sort of inspired by his German friend called Augustus Jaeger, and who was kind of a guy who was his like a music, I don't know how to explain it, look it up on Wikipedia. Anyway, but basically Elgar thought about the character of his German friend who he had a lot of time for, and he composed this tune. It's called Nimrod. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of that. If you're watching this on YouTube, YouTube content might block the piece, so by all means go and search for the piece separately, but I'll just play it now, and hopefully you'll hear what I'm talking about. So just pay close attention to the way the melody comes in, the shape of the melody, where it kind of goes up, drops, then rises again. Here we go. Okay, so there you have, that's Elgar's Nimrod. What I stumbled across recently is that is actually based on a piece by Beethoven, and the piece is called, well, it's Beethoven's 8th Sonata, often called the pathetique. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of that Beethoven piece. Again, if YouTube blocks this, feel free to have a look for Beethoven Sonata number 8, and it's round about the 10-minute marks, so just under halfway through where this melody comes in, and you'll hear how similar the Elgar Nimrod melody is to the Beethoven one, but Elgar kind of follows the contour and harmonises it differently. But anyway, I won't talk anymore, I'll just quickly play it, see what you think. Okay, so now let's go back to Elgar's Nimrod. Okay, and now let's go back to the Beethoven one. If I can just get it to da 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 da, and then here's the Beethoven piano. Yeah, okay, and then Nimrod again. See. So if you've got a minute, it's really worth kind of playing those two pieces side by side. And what's really interesting to me is that the notes aren't exactly the same, but you can really hear that. And to be fair, I think Elgar acknowledged this, that it's really Elgar's piece has taken Beethoven's pathetique sonata and created a new thing just by following the contours. And to be honest, I really prefer Elgar's version. Again, just reinforcing that thing of taking old information and making it new. And I think this is one first approach you can look at. In fact, if you listen to my album, there's a tune called Star, and it takes the theme for Twinkle Twinkle and just puts it into a minor key. So I'll just show you a little example of that, if I can just load it up on my computer. Okay. And here comes the minorized version of Twinkle. Okay, so that was Star from album, and it's a really similar concept. So that's your first starting point, I'd say, where you take a melody that you really like, and it could be a classical melody, it could be any melody, something that you like either the shape of or the actual melodic content, and you vary it a bit, and then taking a leaf out of Elgar's book, you harmonise it different with different chords underneath. I think his harmonisation of the melody is absolutely stunning. Another thing that's really interesting about what Elgar did is he drew on the inspiration of a person as well that sort of helped him fill in the content, if you like. So that's another really top tip. So if you're really struggling to visualise the musical content or to hear the musical content, it really helps to have something in mind. So that could be something like a scene from a film, for example. It could be an action, something, I don't know, swimming, flying, going for a walk. It could be a place that you've been, something like an ocean or something like that, or even, like in Elgar's case, a person who's going to sort of give you nuances. Maybe you think about the way a person talks and walks, they laugh, they speak, whatever, and then you can bring that into your composition. So that's my first thing of breaking out of this kind of not knowing what to do, to think about melodic shapes. Okay, the second one is this thing that I called scene shapes, and I really thought of this, the reason I thought of this whole podcast actually is I've just come off holiday and I was out in the Lake District, which is a particularly beautiful part of England. And I was just looking at the shape of the mountains, and you'd see the mountains, and in England we don't have kind of really jagged mountains like you might get somewhere in Switzerland or the Himalayas, but it kind of rises up slowly from the edges and you get sort of a flattening off and then a slight bit of a peak and then a drifting off, and started thinking about how we can take inspiration from the things that we see around us, and particularly for me, the powerful combination of nature with music, for me, is something that really resonates personally. It doesn't have to be that. It could be a building, something that's a bit more angular and square, or a piece of architecture, or a painting. Absolutely anything could be the starting point. So I'm going to and let me tell you why I think this is really kind of useful. Guitar players, we tend to learn guitar much like people learn language. You learn a set of phrases. They're called licks, and these might be a little small bit of music that's taken from another player, and sometimes we'll either repeat that lick verbatim, and it becomes a little chunk of that we've lifted directly, or we kind of alter it to make it our own. And then you put a series of these licks together to construct solos or a piece of music. And part of the reason for that, I think, personally, is because we, as rock guitar players, our tradition harks back to the blues form. And the blues is basically a fairly, and I'm simplifying this massively for you guys who are real blues connoisseurs, but basically it's a really simple chord progression, largely that repeats, and then we play our little phrases over it. I think the drawback of having this kind of heritage is that we tend to construct our music in much the same way, where we try and jam our favourite ideas, different ideas and technical ideas, and if you're more technical guitarist, maybe your flashiest show-off kind of phrases into something over a basic chord, vamp with a few chords in it. And what tends to happen is that the music kind of has a lot of content in it, but doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere. And as a guitar player, that's something that I kind of try to resist. So one thing I found really helpful is this using a scene, and because it seems to me like a really great way of constructing organic solos that have like a start, and then there's like an uplifting, like you see on as the contour of a mountain, and then you reach the top, and then you're coming back down, and it has a way of pulling, even if you're using sort of licks, a way of pulling a conversation, a story together that feels more organic than just a bunch of licks. So for me, combining this visual element with the musical element is something that's really effective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you an example of a song that I've done called Voyager. And basically, when I was listening to Voyager, when I was trying to write Voyager, one piece of music that I was really listening to at the time was Kind of Blue by So What Off the Kind of Blue album by Miles Davis, but we'll come back to that in a second. So Voyager, if you listen to Voyager, I'm going to play you the keyboard intro, and it has the shape of a wave, okay, and you can hear this rise and fall like a wave. I'll just play that for you now so you can hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's have a listen. Okay, so that's Voyager, and I hope you can hear how it was inspired by the shape of the waves. So da, da, you can sort of hear the rise and then the fall of the crest, and then it sort of evens out really quickly. So you get this kind of surge and then a quick decay. And so that was the source of the inspiration for that tune. I'm going to talk a bit about more of the form of it later. Then the question came up of how to solo over it. So on verse 1, what I literally imagined was the notes being bits of flotsam and jetsam floating on the wave. So this is something really useful where you combine a whole set of imagery to add layers on a musical picture. So I'm going to carry on playing from there. And if you hear for the sort of what would be verse 1, I guess, of this instrumental, you can almost hear the notes rising and falling, and you can always imagine them getting to the crest of the wave and tumbling along and being propelled further and getting bashed around by the waves. But it's all still quite gentle. So yeah, let's have a listen. And then we get to the chorus there, so you can sort of hear, can't you, where there's like kind of bit where you can hear that falling down this bit, and that's really a way of me just trying to get higher and higher and kind of increase the intensity. And then for verse 2, the leaps become even bigger. So here I'm imagining that when I was writing it, I was trying to imagine the waves getting bigger and the gaps being more kind of extreme. So let's have a listen to that. And then we get to the main melody. So this kind of was really, the main chorus melody, I guess, was constructed in a different way. But there you can hear there's like a progression from verse 1 where you can imagine the waves being quite gentle, and then as the waves progress, they get bigger and bigger, and therefore the gaps I was covering on the guitar were much bigger and wider leaps and bigger falls, if you like, from one end of the guitar to the other. So I hope that was interesting and helpful for you guys as a way of pulling together licks and maybe thinking less so much of in terms of I've got to have a bit of this and a bit of that, but more as a way of telling a story. And bear in mind that I wrote this after being playing guitar for just 6 years, and for me, at the time, it seemed like the only way to make something that didn't just sound like Chuck Berry, like Johnny B. Good or something like that. So I found this to be a really, really helpful technique. So the challenge with this kind of scene shapes idea, maybe you could take a picture, maybe you could go for a walk, draw something, just find any kind of shape that helps you imagine not just a contour for the chords like we heard on the intro of Voyager, dun, da, 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 dun, but also a way of constructing a solo and increasing the intensity and of what you're doing there. So we've talked about melodic shapes, scene shapes. Now we're going to get into the third and final section, which is around form. So what is form? Form is, I guess, like the simplest form might be pop music form, which is where you have different sections. So in pop music, you'd have what we call an A section, which would be the verse. Then you have the B section, for example, which would be the chorus, or the hook, as we call it, which is the repetitive bit. So you might go A, B, so A, B again, so verse 1, chorus, verse 2, chorus. And then you might have a C section, which is like a bridge, which is just kind of a getting away from that, and then you bring the chorus back at the end, section A for a double repeat. That's one idea around form, and a guitarist who's the absolute genius at the kind of that pop form is Joe Satriani. He really takes like almost replaces a vocal part with his melodic guitar playing, which is fantastic. He's a genius at that. Then you have other structures like blues, which we've talked about, and then jazz, where you start with a melodic head and a chord structure, and then you improvise around the chord changes and usually then bring the melody back at the end. I'm simplifying grossly, obviously, for all you jazz connoisseurs out there. And then you have more classical forms like symphonies, which are even more complex. So this is form. So what do I mean by form shapes. Again, I harked back earlier to the thing that as rock players, we come from a real tradition born out of the blues in North America. And which I think the disadvantage for us in terms of trying to then compose with that is that, it can get all a bit non-melodic, chunks of licks, a bit repetitive, and then to retain a listener's attention with just playing kind of little chunks and phrases over simple chord structures. The challenge is then how to pull that together and how to construct something. So imagine we came up with the idea of a wave, me and Mark Swift, which is this dum da 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 dum. Right, okay, we've got this great idea. What am I going to do? Jam over that for like 20 million bars? Nobody's going to want to listen to that. The inspiration came from a completely different kind of music to the music I was listening at the time, and it's an album by Miles Davis called Kind of Blue. If you guys, I don't care what music you're into, death metal, Peruvian nose flute, disco music, whatever you're into, you've got to go out and get a copy of Kind of Blue. Or for you modern trendy people, maybe download it on iTunes or listen to it on Spotify. It's just a great album. And at the time, Kind of Blue was Miles Davis, who's a trumpet player, and it came out in 1959, okay? So just on the edge of the 60s. And this record is just like coolness personified. Well, at the time, what jazz was trying to do was trying to get away from all the cliches, i.e. these repetitive kind of phrases and licks and things that just came up and up again. They wanted to break out of that thing and use some of the jazz language to make it a new form of jazz. And Kind of Blue is just this classic record. Anyway, so I heard this album, and the tune that I love off there is called So What. So I'm going to just quickly play the main riff on acoustic guitar. Again, it's not going to sound as good as Miles Davis, obviously, but it goes something like this. And then he does this really cool thing. He does the exact same thing, but one fret further up. So he goes. Played really badly. I'll tell you what I'll do. It might get blocked on YouTube, but I'll just play you the actual version. Good job I'm not a jazz player. Sorry for all you jazz guys who listen to the podcast who are now turning in disgust. So let's have a little listen to the theme. This is So What by Miles Davis. Here it moves up a half step. And then back down again. So that's So What by Miles Davis. Okay, so how did this sort of inspire... There he goes again. How did this inspire me to break out this tune? I just thought, well, we've got the intro melody part for Voyager. What we'll do is we won't move it up a half step. We'll just go down a half step instead. And I'll just play it again so you can hear it. And then you move down a half step. Okay, so it might be interesting to you to know that obviously it's the totally different styles of music. The concept, the musical sound is totally different. Like he's literally just transposing it up a half step. I didn't quite do that. I did it a different way. But listen to Kind of Blue, to So What off the Kind of Blue album really sort of sparked my imagination. And straight away, all of a sudden we start pulling this form together. that I'm talking about. So there's another way actually that I thought you might find interesting that inspired the way Kind of Blue inspired the Voyager song. So Kind of Blue starts off with the piano player Bill Evans. He sort of plays this really beautiful meandering piano theme, and I was looking for something in the middle of my sort of ocean based tune that was a bit kind of had that feel of just like slight movement, really chilled out, kind of exploratory kind of feel. So I'm going to play the Kind of Blue part. Just give me a second. Here's the intro. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we're into the main tune. So that's really amazing, just a moment. I remember just thinking, that's it, that's what I need to do. So so I took that kind of idea, meandering idea, but then what I did is took a theme that for Voyager kept that sort of wave kind of sound, but then I put it into 7/8. 7/8 has this sort of kind of slightly uncertain feel, which obviously on the So What tune, that's totally free time. So I'll see if I can find the part on my tune. I should have cued this before, apologies. Okay, here we go. So here comes the 7/8 bit. Okay, so so they had that 7/8 piece. Is again just in terms of listening to the shapes of how somebody organises a piece can really inspire you. So you might be a little bit surprised to know that So What inspired the Voyage tune. The final part of the song, in keeping with this whole theme of Imagine the Ocean, I tried to almost imagine the wind picking up in the sails of a boat, and then the melody rises, which you just heard. Then you go into the final theme, which is played on guitar and accompanied by on uilleann pipes by Troy Donockley of Nightwish. So let's have a little little listen to that. Okay, so yeah, so I hope certainly that was the image of mine, was just like the wind puffing up the sails and then you're going off and then maybe, sort of almost flying over this whole scene that we'd started out with just the waves on the shore, then moving further into the scene. So basically what you can see is that from this first tune that I wrote, drawing on a whole series of imagery that were all linked, really helped me, at least I feel, pull something that was musically unified, that had a journey from start to finish. You're starting gentle, the leaps get bigger, you have this kind of lull in the middle that follows the wave contour, 7/8, and then it picks up, and then we have this on the record version. You have this huge outro guitar solo that takes you right to the end. So I guess, like with the scene shapes that we've looked at and the melodic shapes, one thing you could try is just literally listen to like the shape of a song, maybe borrow the chords or not borrow the chords, but just follow the shape of how regular the chords are. One thing I do a lot is I'll have long melodies on the verses and chord changes that don't happen as often, and then as we transition to the chorus, the chord changes come quicker and the melodic phrases become shorter. And then as you get to the chorus or the solo, then the notes are really fast, the chord changes are quicker, the drums are quicker, that kind of thing. So these are all different ways you can get a lot of mileage out of just simple ideas, really. So that's Composing from the Void. I hope you kind of found that useful, and what would be great is if you did come up with any ideas like this, or come up with any musical ideas that are based on these principles. I'd love to hear from you guys. I just hope that you're able to take this melodic shape idea, form shapes and scene shapes, and start writing your own music. So, as always, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. It's called the BronsCast. If you enjoyed the Voyager tune, please go over to my website, davebrons.com, and check it out. Or on iTunes, it's sort of everywhere now, the tune. And take care. That was BronsCast, episode 8.